all I'll ask because I know a fair amount of people to ask questions to. So.
I'm going to call to order the joint meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee and the Salem Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee. Welcome. This is our first meeting of this budget cycle. The recorder could do a roll call.
Mayor Peterson? Here. Member Bennett?
Here.
Member Tesler?
Present.
Member Nanke?
Here.
Member Clausen?
Here.
Member Dickey?
Here.
Member Thomas?
Here.
Member Benars?
Here.
Member Clem?
Here.
Member Berger?
Here.
Member Kylowite?
Yep.
Member Bailey? Absent. Member George? Absent. Member Wildfang?
Here.
Member Gonzalez?
Here.
Member Benjamin?
Here.
Member Clark?
Here.
Member Pruitt? Absent.
Okay, thank you very much. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, our first order of business is election of officers. First officer is chairperson. Member Nanke.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would nominate Member Clausen for position of chairperson for...
Second.
Okay, we have nomination of Rich Clausen for chairperson. Are there any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. Accept a motion for unanimous election of Mr. Clausen. Well, let's just
Basically,
vote.
all those in favor?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, excellent. Congratulations. Thank you.
And now we'll do switch chairs. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. A little different sitting up here than it is over there. I guess we'll move right on. I'll accept nominations for vice chair.
Mr. Chair, I nominate Member Jan Kylowite, please.
Second?
So motion by Member Clem, second by Member Nanke. Are there any other motions, nominations? All right, we'll close the nominations and we'll take a vote for Member Kylowite for vice chair. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you. All right. Lastly, moving right through, we'll accept nominations for secretary. Member Bennett.
I nominate Member Dickey.
Second?
Motion by Member Bennett to nominate Member Dickey and second by Nanke. Any other nominations for secretary? All right, close nominations and take a vote for nominating Member Dickey to secretary for the budget committee. All of those in favor say aye.
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 All right, motion carries. Thank you.
Congratulations. Great.
All right, next item on our agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from April 25th, 2012. Take a motion for that.
So moved. Second.
Sorry, I didn't hear who made the motion. Member Dickey and second by Member Thomas. All those in favor of accepting the minutes from April 25th, 2012, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Am I supposed to gavel on every motion?
Yes. There you go.
You should always ask for opposed. just to
Oh,
make sure.
not opposed. I didn't hear any. All right, next, just a note that there's a bunch of handout material on the table, and Manager Norris, you want to talk about them?
Yes, I just wanted to reintroduce Kelly Jacobs to you, who's coordinating our budget process this year, and she's going to walk the committee through the material.
Good evening. The handout material on your agenda this evening is your roster, your Budget Committee roster, and it's current. It is immediately up to date with our new member, and if you notice anything on the roster that is incorrect, that requires correction, please let the Budget Office know immediately, and we'll get it revised. I believe the other items on your desk this evening are the forecast documents, and so I'm going to relinquish the podium to City Manager Norris so she can begin the presentations this evening.
All right, thank you very much. I guess we'll just move right into that.
Oh, good, thank you. Oh,
Oh, hold on. Member Dickey. Okay, oh, yeah, and actually, clarification, I did the same thing. I was looking on the table. The roster's attached to the agenda if you didn't see that.
okay, and I'm just waiting for both screens to populate, and I just wanted to let you know now I'm going to expect applause for the forecast, too. Okay, there it, starting to come.
Nice introductory slide.
So thank you very much. I'm happy to present the forecast to you and wanted to thank several people in the audience for their hard work on this. Deborah Bond, our Administrative Services Director, Kelly Jacobs, who is in the library, but as I said, helping us coordinate the budget process because we have not been successful replacing the budget officer position yet. Chris Snyder from the budget office, Kelly Ladenbeck from the Budget Office, and also Leisha Blaylock from Public Works, who I don't think is here this evening. So what I'd like to do is go over the general fund financial forecast for you that you'll see on your desk. We've presented this in a little different format and more economic discussion than we have in the past. I'm not going to follow this closely. I'm going to just give you the highlights tonight, but hope you will read through it because I think you'll find a lot of useful information as we get ready to talk about our budget. So I'll talk about the general fund financial forecast, and then last year I told you I thought it would be a good idea to do shorter presentations and forecasts for three of our other funds: water and sewer, transportation, and building and safety. We've had those on a fund watch for a couple of years. I'm pleased to say that now the water and sewer fund is in good shape because of the rate increase that we recently had. Building and safety is also on a good course now because of some permit revenue adjustment, but the general fund and transportation funds both continue to struggle from not having enough revenue for the services we provide. So Peter Fernandez will present water and sewer and transportation, and Vicki Woods will present the building and safety forecasts when I'm finished with the general fund. So I think overall we're still on track. We're still planning to go through the forecast, solving for the third year out. The economy, as you know, continues to be fairly volatile, and so it's difficult to predict with great accuracy the fourth and fifth years, but we want to make sure we're still complying with policy through the third year of the forecast. To start with, for people who may be watching from home or for the new Budget Committee members, I wanted to give a little context for the general fund and what that is. The city's expenditure budget is about $430 million citywide. That was for this fiscal year, FY 2013. It's about 1/4 of the citywide budget. The general fund is at about $108.5 million budget authority. Then we have the other large budgets are capital improvements at 97.2. Those are public works capital improvement projects, and some other funds as well. Water and sewer budget at about $80.5 million, and self-insurance $31.3 million, transportation $25.6 million, and then building and safety is a small budget at $3.2 million, and it's part of all of the other funds. We have 21 funds altogether, but we wanted to present those because the economy has certainly been challenging for that fund. I wanted to show you, just as a reminder, we have this year budgeted 668 positions in the general fund. It shows that police and fire public safety services are almost 60% of the costs of the general fund departments. I tried to make the scale so you could at least sort of see the mayor and council budget That's our smallest one. They're at a little over 100,000 because you serve as volunteers and don't have many expenses. And so that gives you an idea of the overall size at this point with the 2013 budget of all the general fund departments. And if anyone has questions as we go through these, please answer. We've, as you know, for people who've been on the Budget Committee for a while, have a lot of challenges since 2008. And this slide shows that we've lost 89.4 positions. And where we are in the general fund positions, this includes parks, at this point compared to where we were when the recession started. So what's a financial forecast? And this is when we do our annual estimate of what our revenue and expenditures are going to be over a 5-year period. Generally, we've done in the past our forecast in late November or early December. But I wanted to wait a little longer this year because we begin to start receiving our property tax revenue in November, and I wanted to get a better handle on whether it was coming in as we had anticipated or not. So we've waited a little longer to do this forecast. And because it's given us some additional current data to use, I'm going to recommend that be our schedule for the following years as well. Next year's forecast is a basis for next year's budget, so we'll want to talk about that a little. In the general fund and other funds that we're having challenges in, we do one schedule so you can see what would happen if we just kept services the way they are right now. What does that look like financially over a 5-year period? And because that doesn't look so good in the general fund, we also have Schedule B that if we're going to maintain financial stability over that 3-year period, what does that look like? And how much would we have to reduce in terms of operations? So our objectives that we've had every year are to maintain an adequate beginning working capital. We want to avoid short-term budget decisions that cause a financial crisis later. Sometimes if you just look at the revenue for 1 year and the beginning working capital, it looks like we could add positions or add services, but if you then project that out over the next 2 or 3 years, you find that we'll be in a deficit position. We want to align our annual operating costs with our annual revenue and achieve a 3rd-year ending working capital within our policy minimum, which is that we'd have at least $10 million, which is about 1.5 months of operating costs for the general fund. And Schedule B, I'm happy to say, meets all of those objectives. I want to talk a little bit about beginning working capital. This shows from the fiscal year 2010 budget what the budgeted working capital was and then where we came in. Last year, this looks like it was about $600,000 higher, but actually we had de jure borrowing for the Urban Renewal Agency that was expended at the end of one fiscal year, and the revenue came in at the beginning of the next. And so when you take that out, we actually decreased the beginning working capital by about $69,000. We were able to stay pretty steady with that, which is, you'll see, is going to be a good thing for helping us through the next 4 years, because we had some additional revenue that came in very late in the fiscal year last year. Some of it we didn't receive until June and July. And then we also had some additional savings. This chart shows the red line across the middle shows what 100% of revenue would be and how we managed our costs. The department heads have managed their costs in the general fund each year to try to keep our costs in line with current revenue. And then in those years when the costs were lower, that helped us build up that beginning fund balance. And you can see that even though we have continued to reduce our expenditures every year, when you look at the forecast, and this is Schedule A, if we just kept the services we have now, which includes 2 closed fire stations, West Salem Library only open a few hours a week, fewer parks positions, fewer code enforcement, fewer planners, we still will exceed our revenue by quite a bit over the next few years. So these are our revenue concerns, and property tax compression I've called out, and I'm going to spend more time talking about that because that's a pretty significant issue for us. Property tax is about 55% of our general fund revenue, and it's just slightly increasing. Franchise fees, we got 14.7 million last year, is about 15%. Our next largest external revenue source is state shared revenue at 4.3 million. That's showing just a little increase over time, and then fines, penalties, and forfeitures is about 3.1 million. All of our other external revenue sources are smaller than those. The one that's larger is we do charge other funds. When general fund employees do work, like our central services for other funds, they transfer money in, and that's about 11 million a year. So as this chart shows, we anticipate that revenue will continue to have some growth. The next one shows what my concern is. This is what's happening to houses, residences in Marion County, how many of them are going to be at compression. And you can see just how that increase is going. We have been able to get the property tax assessor rolls that we're able to review the data. And we know it's been going up every year. We've talked about that for the last 4 years. But you can see that if this trend continues, and I think we've been somewhat conservative in our estimate here, by 2018, 70% of houses in Marion County may be in compression. And to give you a sense of what that is, it's about residences bring in about 54% of our property tax revenue, but they're about 76% of accounts. So we'll be watching that very closely. Once, for people who aren't familiar with compression, once properties go into compression, they don't have the automatic 3% property tax increase every year after that. So those property tax revenues will be flat. This shows what's happening to property tax revenue loss due to compression. On the trend that it's on right now, we'll lose about 1.8 million in fiscal year 17-18. Going from losing about 200,000 just a few years ago. So the result is we have forecasted revenue somewhat conservatively as we go forward, keeping this and other economic data into consideration, but we may have to reduce it in future years if that trend that I just showed you does happen. So we'll watch that every year as we do the forecast. So now I want to show you Schedule A, what happens if we continue our current service level. I just want to call your attention to the ending working capital that we're estimating, and you can see by the third year of the forecast, so we have the current year is in 2013, and then the third year of the forecast is fiscal year 2016. We're below our target, our financial target of 10 million, of having at least 10 million. And that's after we take out where you see base operations, and then we hope that we won't spend more than 200,000 of our general fund contingency. So we hope we'll be able to just roll that 2.3 million over to each preceding year. And then I'm estimating each department could save about 2.75%. We've had that at 3 or 3.5% in previous years, but as we've cut more out of each department budget, and especially in police and fire, that's more difficult to achieve. I mean, it's nice when, legal saves 3%, but that's only a few $1,000s. But in the police department, 3% is $1 million. So it makes a big difference. I just wanted to walk through what this chart means, and I'm going to use the next fiscal year as an example. So we'll start out with about 17.7 in beginning working capital after the end of the current fiscal year, and there may be some additional funds that are rebudgeted. We're expecting almost 99 million in current revenue. Then when you look under expenditures, just our base operations expenditures for the current year will be about 106 million. Assuming we can save the 2.3 million from contingencies and have a 2.75% saving of 2.83 million, our net expenses will be 101.18. Now when you look at current revenue, you see that's above current revenue. So we'd be spending about 101 million and bringing in about 99 million in current revenue. And that's what this chart shows. If you can, the bottom blue line that says revenue less expenses, that's how much we'll be overspending current revenue every year in Schedule A. If we just kept our current services as much as we've already reduced them, over that 5-year period, we'll spend almost $34 million than we'll be bringing in current revenue. So that's why we always go to Schedule B to look at then how do we avoid that kind of scenario. This is a balanced budget approach and shows that in the third year of the forecast would be within our target at 10.5 million. That reduces the following 2 years. But I really do believe that enough things are in play right now that may not happen. If there is any PERS reform that does meet legal challenges, that would remove if the governor's proposal went through, we wouldn't have to do additional budget reductions. There may be an opportunity to go out for a property tax levy above the compression cap of $10 per thousand. If that happened and council wanted to do that, and if voters approved it, that would be another opportunity for revenue. And if the economy continues its upward movement, although we don't ever think it'll get back to, in the foreseeable future, to what it was before the recession, but that may also bring in some additional revenue that might help in that 4th or 5th month. So when I looked at this, you can see the additional reductions, blue line in the middle of the page. In this scenario, next year, and departments are already developing their budget projections with saving the $470,000 this year. Then I'm assuming we'd have to, in this forecast, cut another $1 million the following year, then 2.5, 2.7 essentially, and then 3 million. I'm making this recommendation that we push those larger cuts out into the out years because there may be some, PERS reform or other things that would not require us to make those cuts. And as we've been going through this process, I've always tried not to make the cuts too soon, not to do it before we really needed to do it. And in this scenario, we're still outspending current revenue by about 12 million over the 5 years, but because we've built up a higher beginning fund balance, we're still okay through about the middle of FY 2017. So I think it's a reasonable approach. Any questions about that? Yes, Member Clem.
Yeah, go ahead, Member Clem.
Just before we go on, I want to find out, when I look on page 5 at Schedule A, and I know we're in B right now, but it's the assumptions used for the base expenditures in A that have caught my attention. They tend to go up about 3 million a year, and then all of a sudden in 14, 15, 15, 16, they tend to go up like 4.6 million, 4.8, almost 5 million in that last year's. And I looked for
It's PERS.
that is the PERS bill.
Yeah, it's mostly PERS increases. PERS will increase July 1st, and then 2 years out, so FY 2016 and then FY 2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's nothing in here about the assumptions on the expenditures.
Yes, as you read more, and I know you haven't had it before, but we'll show you that as we go through this presentation, that
Okay.
you didn't have the forecast earlier, but that's primarily what it is.
Okay, and when I look at those larger reductions later, that's when the PERS bill.
That's right.
That's the baseline assumption for that.
That's right.
And then the risk that's covered on page 9 and 10, Linda, the low and high and medium.
Yes.
With regard to what the league wants to do in terms of property tax limitation and option levies, indicates high, but in that case, it would be a good thing if the league's legislation went through in terms of the city budget.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
Now,
right.
on the
Okay.
next page, it categorizes some of these risks as low, and those are also good. So
I'll go over those in
Okay.
a minute to tell you how we were viewing that. I understand from the discussion that might be
Thank you.
confusing. Thank you. This shows, I showed you an earlier chart with Schedule A that showed that in the out years, we were spending quite a bit more revenue than we're bringing in. This is modified some, and on this chart, Member Clem, you can see that part of that is because of those big increases in PERS that are coming due. We've had to increase that quite a bit this year. I'll show on the PERS chart when we get to it. We were anticipating having to add an additional 1.7 million. It will be 2.9 million when we actually got the final rates. So our operation cost concerns primarily PERS rates, and I'll talk about that in more detail. Healthcare cost increases, although we've been able to keep our healthcare costs well in line with industry averages, and we're anticipating they'll go up about 10% each year with the forecast, which seems like a lot, but it's low compared to what's happening in the industry. The Federal Health Care Act has some additional costs that are coming to employers. One of those is to help the federal government fund health care costs for people who don't have it right now. There's a $63 per year additional charge for every life covered in your plan. So we cover 4,000 people between employees and families and retirees and their families. So for the general fund, that's an additional cost of $250,000, $250,000 every year for 3 years to help fund that. That's supposed to go away after the end of 3 years, so we've assumed that in the forecast, but that additional cost will come due in January, and so we've added that to the forecast. And there may be other costs too that we're not aware of yet as they're working through the details of those plans. And then labor rates, we'll be negotiating with the fire union, the communications workers union, and AFSCME this year. In the forecast, as I've always do, I projected 1% pay increases, and then we'll go into collective bargaining negotiations and see how that works out. If it's more than 1%, we'd have to make more cuts to stay on forecast. The difference in the 1% is I am recommending 2% for non-represented employees. They've lagged behind quite a bit, union employees over the last 4 years, and to achieve pay equity, I think we need to do a little more 1 year for them in the next year budget. So I'll be recommending that in the budget for council and the budget committee to consider. So this shows the 3 years have the plus marks where we'll have PERS increases. And I just wanted to show you the dark blue at the bottom are pension bond debt service payments. And then the 6% pickup amount we pay is in the lighter blue. And then what's happened in the gray to employer payments in the general fund with because of market losses in PERS. And that has been a big reason why we've had to make some of our reductions going into next year and this year, and then why we'll have to do more in the next few years going out. So there are a number of things in the forecast that are not within our control. PERS rates, we don't have influence over that. As I said, the federal and industry healthcare costs increased property tax compression. That's really a factor of the economy. We have limited opportunities for additional revenue. I asked our finance department a couple of months ago, I guess last summer, if we were to go out, given how much compression we have for $1, which would be per 1,000 assessed valuation, which would be a big operating levy, what would we bring in? And in the first 2 years, we'd actually lose $5 million over that 2-year time period. And then by the 5th year, we're losing $5 million a year because it throws so many more properties into compression. So we really don't have a lot of opportunities to get more revenue that we need in the general fund. And then recession and what happens with inflation. Right now, we think the inflation risk is pretty low. And then what happens with the federal government as they deal with the debt ceiling can have an effect on revenue we get, as well as just the impact on the economy. So here are the forecast revenue assumptions that we have in the general fund. No new revenue or increased fees, although council has asked us to look at fee increases, and we'll bring that back to council later this spring to look at. Reductions are recommended as needed in the out years to maintain that financial stability through the third year. In the general fund, we have no new services and no higher service levels. Council or the Budget Committee may want us to reprioritize some things as we go through the budget, but this forecast does not assume any new services. And I've talked about the market wage adjustments that are built into the forecast. The transportation transfer, I've been talking about that for a few years, and we've decreased it the last 3 years. When we did the forecast last year, I flagged that I didn't think we'd be able to move any money into transportation next year. But in looking at what happens with that budget if we don't, I am recommending that we move $300,000 from the general fund to transportation. You'll see when we do that forecast that that's still a problem in transportation that we're going to need to address. The forecast assumes, because I think these are budget decisions and not my decision, it still assumes $400,000 support to social services, maintains a higher level of transient occupancy tax support for eligible parks operations. We have an opportunity next year to increase that because now we've met our $4 million target for the gain loss reserve for the conference center. So we can pick up more of that, which will free up a little bit of general fund money. And then we're assuming a 1.6% overall increase in materials and services due to inflation. We are, last year I budgeted $500,000 in non-departmental for general fund facilities and information technology needs. We need some new roofs. We have some ADA accessibility improvements we need to make in some of our general fund budgets. And this is a way you have asked me to make sure that we're at least addressing maintenance needs as we go forward so we don't get farther behind on those. And so I'm recommending that we continue that. And that cost is in our operations cost. I've reduced department savings to 2.75%. It's not that much difference in terms of dollars, but it's probably more realistic. And then again, assuming we don't spend more than $200,000 of general fund contingency every year. If we don't even spend the $200,000, then that rolls to the next year. So we think the risk, and maybe this is an easier way to say it, from slower property tax revenue growth is high unless the legislature does something about operating levies and council decides to go out for one and it's passed, so that's a lot of ifs. We think the risk to reduce state shared revenue is medium. Anytime the legislature's meeting, there's always that risk, but they haven't touched it in the last 2 years. So, I don't think that's too likely. Reduce franchise revenue, I think the risk to that is low. It's not increasing much, it's pretty flat, but it stayed stable. And I don't think there's much worse risk of a worse recession coming up, depending on what happens with the debt ceiling. So, we'll see. The expenditure risks, higher PERS rates, that's high risk. That's going to happen unless we have some reform. Higher healthcare costs and labor cost increases are medium risk. And then high inflation and higher use of contingencies, I think, are pretty low risk. So that gives you an idea of the certainty we feel about this forecast. And forecasts are always, at this point in time, with the information we have right now, and then life happens, so sometimes things change, but with a lot of people working on it, thinking about it, using a lot of data, I think it's a pretty reliable forecast. So in summary, our annual operating costs continue to outpace current revenue. We have continued volatility outside of our control. We do have a stronger beginning working capital, so we won't have to do that. We did think we were going to have to do $3.5 million in reductions next year and another $3.5 the following year. But because we were able to save some additional money and had some unexpected revenue, we won't have to do that. Some of the unexpected revenue, which we have built into this forecast, is last year, we received almost an historically high amount of several years past due delinquent property tax payments. And we think that is from foreclosures or when people have purchased those homes or properties, they've had to bring their property tax up to date. I'm assuming that's going to continue for 2 or 3 years through the forecast. If it doesn't, we'll watch that closely and we might have to adjust our revenue expectations if that doesn't continue to happen. The operating costs exceeding revenue is that structural imbalance. We have some very important core services in the general fund, and we're on a somewhat unstable or inadequate, I guess is a better word to use, revenue structure, because property tax is increasing, going to increase at a very slow rate. Franchise fees are flat. State shared revenue, slight increase, but it's not much money. Fines, penalties, and forfeitures with the recession have actually dropped. We had some reduction last year. So we don't, our costs are going up at about 3% a year, but our revenue is increasing at a much slower rate than that. So I want to talk a little bit about the budget process. Departments receive their budget targets from me in December, and they're due later this month, their first recommendations, and then we'll work through that in February. It'll go to the budget office. They'll do their analysis and print the draft budget documents. The budget committee will get back together again in April to hear department budgets. Well, actually before that, in January and early February, we'll have some meetings where you can familiarize yourself with the department operations. Then budget committee meetings April, May, and then a final approval of the budget by the city council in June. So that's the general fund revenue forecast. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for the manager on that one? I know I'm going to be interested to read through it and kind of put my brain on it, so.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think next on our agenda is the 5-year forecast for the transportation department. And for new members, this is a little different where we're getting these out in front of us. We haven't really done forecasts.
No, we always look at this every year, but we had not presented it to the budget committee before, and I thought last year that it would make sense to do that, to start doing that.
Okay, and looks like Public Works Director Peter Fernandez will be making this presentation.
Thank you, Chair Clausen. Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director. Before I start, I want to re-acknowledge the staff that helped us put this together, our management analysts in Public Works, Alicia Blaylock and Vicki Clark, that I don't make a financial move without, and this is absolutely a team effort, so I also want to acknowledge David Lacey and Jimmy Thompson, who are the management analysts in finance, that we work very, very closely with them in all of our financial planning that we do, so I really appreciate their efforts in all of this. This is my only slide. Well, I have a Schedule B slide here. I just want to make a couple of comments and be very brief. The pie chart that Linda showed that had the $25 million to Transportation Fund, that is actually the Public Works Fund, so that is the entirety of Fund 155. Transportation is actually a smaller piece of that. So Transportation Operations is functionally a part of the Parks and Transportation Services Division, which is budgeted in Fund 155. That's the $25 million piece. Transportation is much smaller, and we'll get to the details here in a minute. So in addition to Transportation, Fund 155 also houses Parks Operations and the Engineering Division, and you'll see in the budget for next year, we're moving engineering to Fund 310, to the Water and Sewer Fund, so that 155 really becomes just Mark Bechtel's fund. He's our Parks and Transportation Services Manager and does an able job of managing not just the operations, but the tight budget that we have always had in this fund. The 5-year forecast that you see before you, well, that's part of the Fund 155. Transportation, just by way of introduction, Transportation Operations is a full-service unit. It operates and maintains the city's transportation infrastructure, and that's it includes administration, traffic engineering, signal operations and maintenance, streets maintenance, signs and markings, street sweeping. So everything that you see out on the street, sidewalk maintenance, is all done by our staff. They do not do the capital construction work, so the capital construction work is managed by engineering, and that's all done by private contractors. Transportation Operations is funded primarily from the city's allocation of state highway gas taxes, and then there's a variety of small transfers from the general fund, grants, and fees and service, and you see that in Table 1 of this little piece here. I don't know if is it part of the book or is it separate?
It's separate.
So you see it there in Table 1 where it comes from. As you can see from this 5-year forecast, this fund is in serious financial distress. Beyond the issues discussed by the city manager in her presentation about what the fund is facing, and we face the same issues here with PERS increases and inflation, and our inflation is different from the CPI because materials, asphalt, goes up based on petroleum, what the value of petroleum. So that's gone down, so asphalt's gotten a little cheaper, but if, any kind of issues like that, asphalt wildly changes, and that's a big cost. Concrete, electricity is a big piece of what we pay for, so all of that, varies, and that's different from just standard inflation that people normally think about. Beyond that, we've also seen issues. We have issues significantly lower than expected gas tax revenues. When the gas tax increases were passed several years ago, there were very nice predictions that really have never occurred. We have learned our lesson and typically budget to 95% of ODOT's predictions, and over the last several years, sometimes we've had to reduce our revenues even beyond that. So I think this last year, revenues have actually come in at about the 95% level, so it's been at about what we've budgeted, but not at 100% of what ODOT had told us, what their expectation had been. Declining general fund support. There was a time when the general fund transferred upwards of $1 million into this fund. We're down to $300,000 in the coming fiscal year, and then zero, and you know why that is, because you see the issues that the general fund has. And at this point, we have almost non-existent development review fees. Traffic engineering gets some of that money, but with no development, there's really no other money supporting those services. So in effect, our costs are climbing significantly faster than our revenues. To address this issue, we need to permanently cut $4.8 million over the next 5 years to keep solvent. And if you would switch to Schedule B, you see that that's, there it is in the red, the permanent cuts. Because the way we operate the street system, we have to be sensitive to the safety issues. There's certain things that we absolutely must continue to fund, and they roughly are in the order of the signals have to operate, the safety signs, stop signs, yield signs, speed limit signs, warning signs, the striping on the street has to be maintained, guardrail has to be maintained when it's hit. So because all of that would have to come first, the cuts, the permanent cuts that we would have to make would have to be in pavement maintenance and sidewalk maintenance and sidewalk repair and those kinds of things. So if we have to go to this level of cut, what you would see is a significant reduction in what is already a very light pavement maintenance program in the transportation system. As it is, we do very little pavement work. Don't be confused. The capital construction work that you see out on the street and a lot of the big pavement repair that you saw in downtown this summer, last summer, what you saw on South Commercial Street, that is those are bond projects. So those have been funded by a Streets and Bridges bond issue. Several years ago, we had a number of ARA-funded repaving, so we were very fortunate to have that, but that is not this budget. That is the good fortune of the citizens passing the bond in '08, the ARA funds, URA funds have paid for some of those projects. So you see a lot of new asphalt, but it's not the day-to-day pavement maintenance. For example, we've done virtually no local street pavement maintenance for a number of years. When we had more money, we used to do a lot of slurry seal programs, and so we would maintain local streets, collector streets. We haven't done that for the last 3 years. So, and those streets continue to deteriorate. So at some point, that becomes problematic for us. We have been working on a funding solution. Actually, TJ Sullivan brought this up a year or two ago. It's something that we've been talking about for a number of years. It's what we consider the lowest hanging fruit, which is to figure out a funding source to pay for the streetlights. Streetlights, the electricity to run the streetlights is roughly $1.3 million of our transportation budget. It comes right off the top to keep the town lit and the signals the electricity bill. It's about I said $1.3 million. So if we could figure out a way to pay for that, then that would relieve initially that issue. We have had discussions with the council's finance subcommittee. The finance subcommittee is supportive of the idea, and we're having a council work session on January 28th to discuss it. Coming out of the finance subcommittee was the idea that perhaps we could add a little more to that funding source to bring back the local street pavement maintenance program. So that will also be discussed at the work session, and then at some point brought to council for discussion and action. So that concludes my comments on the transportation operations forecast. Are there any questions?
Anybody have any questions? Member Dickey?
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to what you were saying about the bond projects that we have going on, I guess, for anybody watching this. We also have a lot of, some streets in our city that are ODOT, and so they do projects, and so it might
Right.
look like the city's got a lot of things going on when really that's not us, and we really do have needs that we are not being able to meet.
Yes, we've been very fortunate with the bond, and we are very grateful for everyone that helped us bring the bond to the voters, supported the bond, to the voters who passed the bond, but that is not maintenance. So that's capital.
Member Wildfang?
Yes, I missed the piece that you mentioned when you referenced TJ saying that there was a possibility.
Oh, I'm sorry. TJ Sullivan, I think last year and maybe the year before, talked about the streetlight fee. So the idea of creating a streetlight fee to pay for that portion of it, which would immediately save us $1.3 million. It wouldn't save us. It would transfer that cost to a different, create a revenue source, and then immediately find us that $1.3 million in the budget.
Who would the fee be levied on?
The citizens, everyone.
As in the form of what?
Well, there are a number of ways to do it. The way that is typically talked about is it would be a line item on the water sewer bill.
I'm reminded from some of the URAs where we've not maintained, we don't put our money back into, and I'm thinking of certain parking structures.
Right.
Linda spoke of at least take an attempt to try to fund some of those repairs so they don't become capital improvement projects down the road. Has that been something that you can address within the budget, at least an attempt?
Yeah, we have. I mean, when we're done funding the electricity, when we're done funding the safety issues, so signs and markings and some of these other things, there just isn't a whole lot of money left for pavement maintenance, for a true program of pavement. And we recognize that, in fact, this city has a long history of discussing pavement maintenance. I have reports in my office that date back to 1992 when Rick Scott was the street superintendent. He wrote a report called Pothole Busters. And so as far back as 1992, we were talking about it. And we simply have never been able to achieve a solid level of funding to be able to maintain a pavement maintenance program.
Follow up on this. It's not that I'm looking for a stable source, but I'm looking for something that might attempt to at least address the issue, so we're not kicking that can a fourth year down the road, and then all of a sudden we have such tremendous repairs that we're having to go out for another bond.
Right. So at the work session, we'll talk about what that program may be and what it looks like. It's not on a fee basis. It's a very small amount of money. But it's a continuing amount of money, and then we'd be able to do that. Councilor Clem, Councilor Nanke, Councilor Rogers, when he was here, sat on a Save Our Streets committee, and they recognized that there was a need. In fact, the goal was to move to adequate funding, not excellence, just adequate. And we simply have not because of just the financial pressures that the city is under, we've just never have been able to move even to adequate. But you're right, when we don't fund it appropriately, then it becomes a capital project. So 40% of our bond issue, 40 million of the 100 million, was really just capital maintenance, because we haven't kept up. So that's but we have to do it. We have to repave Commercial Street, we have to repave Lancaster, we have to repave downtown, which was a mess. So that's the only way to do it. So we have to use our credit card instead of using our debit card.
Thank you, Member Benars. Any other questions? All right. I guess, thank you, Mr. Fernandez.
Oh, I'm still here.
Yeah, well, I guess that was the first part of it, right? And I'm assuming we'll have a little bit more discussion that when we get to the Public Works presentation of what we have going on in terms of what we currently do. Is that the intent?
Yes, when we have the department overview, we can talk about that in more detail. And then when we're in the budget presentation for their budget recommendation, we can talk about it again.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Peter, can we drag out that moving to adequate chart and provide that to budget?
Of course.
I'm just curious if this 300,000 that Linda's recommending we send from general fund to, well, to transportation, where that puts us on that chart.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Just draw
we
us a
can do-
line, what we are doing. So
It'll be very, very
sounds like
low,
it'll just
very
be
low on that
critical.
chart.
How
Yeah.
far below it is?
I think we were going to be at 2.4 million, 2.5 million this year, so it's, yeah,
Yikes.
yes, very, very low.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
if there's no other questions on transportation, I think we'll wrap that one up, and we can definitely, I think we'll be reading that and having more questions for you when we come back for Public Works. And we'll move on to the Water and Sewer Fund 5-year forecast.
Right, so if the Water and Sewer Fund is Fund 310 in the budget. Just by way of introduction, that is an enterprise fund that supports maintenance operations and capital construction for all of our water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure. We just went through a significant review of our cost of service analysis that the council adopted in August. We went through our rate proposal that the council adopted in November. And back in 2010, we went through our efforts to create our stormwater utility, which was long overdue, and the council adopted it at the end of 2010. And it was deferred for implementation. So with your utility bill starting on the 1st of February, all of those will be implementing. Stormwater implements over a series of 4 years. The first rate increase took effect in January, so you'll see it in your February bill. If you own a backflow device, you'll see the backflow fee that the council adopted a year ago. So many, many things, and the bill will change in many ways. Some people will see, most single-family residential customers will see an increase, but some commercial customers and all industrial customers will see significant decreases in their bills because of the changes in the cost of service analysis. So it's a wide variety of things. We've sent out thousands of notices and a lot of information, so we're hopeful that the bills will run correctly, all 55,000 of them in the month of February. What you see before you is this fund is in really good shape, and I appreciate the efforts of the Water Wastewater Task Force and the council for their consideration of the rate proposal and the COSA proposal. Because of that, the fund is in as good a financial shape as it has ever been. What you see before you shows the 6% rate increase that's effective January of 2013, the 6% rate increase that's effective January 2014, and then our anticipated 3% rate increases into the future. Once again, like any other enterprise, there are significant inflationary pressures, and then in this fund in particular, there are significant capital pressures. We run a very old utility that's in need. We've invested, I've said this before, we invested $350 million in this utility over the last 15 years, and we probably need to invest another $300 million in improving and modernizing our wastewater plant, our water plant, our pipes, our reservoirs. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. This is absolutely normal for utility. We are woefully behind in stormwater infrastructure implementation. You see that in some of the flooding that we see in town. So just a lot of work to be done, and that's just part of our business. What you see differently in Fund 310 from other funds is you see a significantly large beginning working capital. You see that in the $30 million range. It's important that you look down at the reserves column because we have to carry 20+ million of that, $23 million of that is reserves. We carry $200 million in debt that we're paying off. The expenditures, the $77 million that you see in expenditures, 24 million of that is debt service. So we must carry those reserves. We also must carry those reserves because we have a $3.4 billion utility that anything can break at any time and anything can cost millions of dollars to repair. So it's just important that we maintain our financial health in this manner. But without getting into too much other detail, unless somebody has questions, this is a very, very healthy fund. We are managing it to the commitments that we've made to transfer capital monies. Also in those expenditures are $6.5 million of capital cash to be transferred to the capital construction funds, and that increases in out years to $7, $8, and $9 million. And we have to do it in cash because we simply cannot afford to borrow until we pay off the significant debt that we incurred from the previous significant improvements that we did. So we're committed to doing that, and we're committed to coming back and asking for no more than what we proposed, in the next biennium, no more than the 3% rate increase unless some catastrophe happens. So we're absolutely managing ourselves to that. So,
thank you. Any questions from the committee? If there's no questions, could you remind us how far out we're looking for the debt payoff on this loan that we have out there?
We just refinanced half of the debt, and that will pay off in 2025 or so. Sandra Montoya, our Deputy Director of Finance, did a masterful job of negotiating the note with the bank so that when we get out to 2017, we can prepay without penalty. So that is a decision that we can talk about with the Budget Committee and the Council if we want to start allocating more money to pay that debt off. Then the other half of the debt is a very long-term debt, so we are years and years away from paying that off. I think it's okay to have a certain amount of debt. We're a large utility, but we simply could not, continue to incur the debt that we incurred in the past without paying off a substantial amount. So our commitment is to at least pay off that half. And then as we look to the next large program, Willow Lake needs significant improvements or other significant improvements that we have to do, then we can consider debt financing at that point. Okay. So we're a good 10 years away before I can recommend considering any debt financing.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank
Fernandez. And we'll move on to the Building and Safety Fund.
Good evening. My name is Vicki Harden-Woods. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Salem. And as the Community Development Director, I oversee several operations, many of which are funded by the General Fund. But the Building and Safety Fund is actually funded by an enterprise fund, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. I have only a few slides and a brief presentation to share with you. I'll be describing what the Building and Safety Division does and how the fund works, the assumptions upon which the 5-year forecast is based, how revenues and expenditures compare over time, and the status of the estimated ending working capital. The Building and Safety Division is responsible for plan review and inspections for all buildings and maintains the Permit Application Center, which issues almost all permits and licenses for the city. The Building and Safety Fund is only a very small component of the city budget. You've been looking at tens of millions of dollars. We're going to be talking in the single-digit $1 million for this discussion. It's a total of $3.2 million operating budget. The fund is an enterprise fund dependent upon revenues, primarily in the form of fees for support. Revenues and expenditures must balance. Like the construction industry, the Building and Safety Fund tends to be highly volatile, fluctuating from year to year based on building activity and valuations. This fluctuation is managed by annual and sometimes even mid-year adjustments and the maintenance of a service stabilization fund. The Service Stabilization Fund is included in the operating plan filed with the State of Oregon Building and Codes Division, to whom we are accountable for administering the state building code. The operating plan calls for a 6-month operating reserve. The bottom line of the 5-year forecast is that the fund is projected to be on solid footing throughout the forecast period. The forecast is based on an estimated 2% annual increase in permitting activity. For the purpose of the forecast, we also assumed that by working with our stakeholders, we will index fees for inflation beginning in January of 2015. We are also projecting that as activity increases, staffing needs will also increase, and the forecast assumes the addition of 1 employee in fiscal year 13-14. And of course, we have assumed the same personnel cost as the general fund for the Building and Safety Fund. Estimates of activities are based on economists' forecast of increasing construction activity and local trends. More detailed discussion of activity projections can be found starting on page 2 of the Building and Safety Fund financial forecast that you received tonight. So it's one of these loose leaf documents that you received. After a dramatic reduction in construction during the recession and continuing for several years, this year I can report to you that things are looking up. Valuations are up 9% over last year at this time. And this chart shows the steady rise in single-family permits over the past 2 years, with an increase of over 8% last year and a continued increase thus far for this calendar year. This slide compares annual revenue with annual expenditures. The impact of the recession on the fund is apparent, but our recent fee increase, in conjunction with the economic recovery, makes for a balanced future over the long run, with revenues and expenditures both projected to increase at approximately the same rate. Schedule A on page 4 of the forecast shows the complete financial forecast. Expenditures increased from about $2.8 million this year to about $3.4 million in fiscal year 17-18. Another component of the Building and Safety Fund is the estimated ending working capital. This balance includes 2 separate funds, the Service Stabilization Fund and the Capital Asset Reserve. Throughout the forecast period, the Stabilization Fund remains at our agreed-upon 50% of the operating budget. The Capital Asset Reserve is established by council policy as a savings account to be invested in capital assets and customer service improvements. The Capital Asset Reserve is projected to decrease over time as a result of planned technological improvements. Thus, the ending fund balance is projected to decrease slightly from $3.6 million this year to $3.3 million in fiscal year 17-18. In conclusion, the Building and Safety Fund is in good shape and is forecast to remain so. We have survived the deepest recession in 50 years and maintained adequate reserves and the ability to invest in the future. We have managed to keep fees to some of the lowest in the region and continue to deliver quality service, and we look forward to doing so in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woods. Any questions from the committee? Member Berger?
Yeah, last year when the fees were discussed, it was discussed as this is going to be the first step, and if things don't look up, we're going to come back and possibly have to raise fees more. And so what I'm hearing now is that things are looking up and it's unlikely you're going to have to do another round of fee increases.
Things are looking up, and it does appear as though we may not have to do that. We are looking at trying to index our fees to the cost of living in some way so that we don't have to do large bumps over time as increased costs occur. But the major kind of fee increase that we had talked about, and we did one the previous year, is not on our agenda at this point in time.
Any other questions? No? All right, thank you, Ms. Woods. I know that I appreciate staff's focus on this one because of all the departments, this might be the most volatile with this
Yes.
round of recession that we've had, so thank you.
Yeah, we actually reduced our staff by almost 50% over the course of the last 7 years. We're starting to sort of ramp back up a little bit again.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear for our local economy too, so I'm glad to hear it. Okay, thank you. Our next agenda item is public testimony. I don't see many members of the public in here tonight, so we have one. I don't see you getting up, so I guess we'll move on from there. Any other business any members have to bring for the Budget Committee? Member Nanki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to thank you for a job well done on your first meeting, and to
Thank you.
thank our previous Chair Bennett as well for his service in that role.
Thank you. Member Calabite?
Thank you. I wanted to point out that the Department of Revenue is doing a training course in local budget law. So maybe for some of our new members, that might be interesting. I took it last year. It's from like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Over in Kaiser. I have some information. There's also a listserv that they maintain for all things related to local budget law that I would highly recommend subscribing to.
We'll send that information out to the Budget Committee members.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Well done, Mr. Vice Chair.
Good suggestion. All right, any other business?
Member Berger had his hand up.
Do you have your hand up, Member Berger?
I was going to ask you to email it out, and
There we go.
you were faster than I was.
I got it, all right.
All right, if there's no other business, when is our next meeting, Andrew Norris? January 23rd, am I right on that one?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
At
so
6 p.m.
mark your calendars for an exciting evening a week from tonight. With that, we'll adjourn.